You want to understand us? First, understand who we are. Find out the things that really matter. What we care about, what we want. What good is the data if the sample's not valid? It's like asking a Democrat about the Republicans' views. It's like asking a baby about grocery store prices. We're the client, and we're the customers. This is all about who we are. Because we are Central. So let us show you who and what the CBA is, so you can see if it's who you thought we were all along. Before we get started, there's some things we should tell you. Although the majority of students that survey are CBA students, there are a few that are not. In fact, 10% of the population didn't know they were in the CBA or weren't in the CBA. So keep in mind that 10% of the population doesn't really apply to the CBA. Also important to note was that only 8% of students surveyed were members of the Calkin Business Residential College. So who are we? First, let's look at the battle of the sexes. Out of 400 surveys, the results were pretty even, with 42% being females and males having a slight advantage at 57%. This means that there's about one male for every female. What about the timeless old question of how old are you? The majority of students at CMU that are CBA students are 22 years old, with 21 and 20 falling shortly behind. But there's another way to look at age, by class standing. Seniors were highly represented in the survey, with almost half of the percentage. It could be that seniors generally have their majors figured out by the time they get there, or it could be that seniors have a greater need for iPads. Here's a graph showing you that those surveyed were mostly seniors. Is this also true for the CBA? Next, let's look at majors. Of the students surveyed, the majority of them were marketing students. 18.7% of them were logistics students. Finance majors made up 12.2% of the population of the surveyed, and accounting represented 14.7%. Previously, you asked us what it took for students to drink the Kool-Aid. But did they already have the Kool-Aid? Generally, yes. In the question with motivation in the CBA classes, students rated at 4s with 75% of the time. So how far does this motivation get them? Let's look at grades. The highest frequency GPA of the sample was a 3.0, where the mean GPA of the sample was a 3.19, so we can assume that the GPA was about a 3 point. We found out in the first session of this that the clubs and organizations made their time at CMU. So how much are they getting out of CMU? Only 9.1% felt very involved, where over 50% felt that they were not involved or ranked it as a number 2, which means barely involved. We found that the number of organizations students were in tended to be split evenly, amounting up to 85% between 0, 1, and 2 organizations. So what organizations were the most popular? Beta Alpha Psi was with 2.5%, and then 11.9% was in the Supply Chain Management Association. Because if they can't find ways to fit in, then they'll go to where they can fit in, home. As you can see, this does not appear to be a problem with our sample, because almost 40% of our population only goes home once a month. Could one thing that gets CMU students to stay at Central over the weekend be sports? Probably so, since 73% of our surveyed had an interest in college sports. Or maybe what's keeping them here is work. As you can see, the employment versus the unemployment is relatively even between the amount of people surveyed. Many students spend their free time with social media. In fact, 63% check their Facebook once a day, and 95% of the sample own a laptop. 67.3% own a smartphone, and 13.7% of the population own a tablet, and thus are always just a finger touch away from the CBA Facebook page, which 41% didn't know existed. However, now that they're informed, 75.8% would be interested in liking it. Since over 95% of the sample are on Facebook, the CBA could also outreach to other medias, because over 60% are on Twitter and over 65% are on LinkedIn. But in the end, students still prefer emails number one to all. That's who we are, Central. We're a group of students with varying majors, GPAs, and ages who spend their time devoted to different organizations and social medias. But when it all comes down to it, we have one thing in common. We are Central.